All right, we're back. So it's a rainy day where I'm at, stuck inside. So we're going to be checking out Searle's consciousness as a problem in philosophy and neurobiology. And I already watched part of this last time. I already said my spiel about how I feel about this, what a tragedy it is that people take advantage and trample over trust and make this a bad place to work, to do philosophy. I mean, many people do philosophy just casually, but if it's your profession or you're a student, then that should be respected. So it's unfortunate. However, I also said that I was deeply influenced by Searle, his work in philosophy, especially biological naturalism. And I thought of myself as when I was younger as a biological naturalist. And obviously, anyone who's ever met me sort of knows I still have a deep proclivity to defend the identity theory. I think not that it's true, but that it hasn't been shown to be false. That's kind of related to the biological naturalism. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say consciousness is just like digestion, but I certainly used to think that. And I used to really think of myself as like in this school of philosophy, like common sense, down to earth, no nonsense, defending consciousness. And these are things that I still prioritize and see myself as interested in doing. But I never really fully understood Searle's discussion of dualism and physicalism. And he's sort of famous for arguing that we need to go beyond the standard categories of dualism and physicalism, and that they both make the same common mistake. And there's a way in which even like I'm thinking now, like I even see some of the stuff that I say as being kind of related to that as well, arguing that, for example, the illusionist and the panpsychists make the same mistake in taking the conceivability arguments too seriously. Um, So anyway, I find myself conflicted because while I don't respect him anymore, I did previously, and so I was wondering, like, what do we think about this argument that he has about dualism and physicalism? So I'm trying to go back and revisit that. Last time we got really distracted by his revisitation of his stuff on computation, and I guess he sees that as like a main. Now that I'm reflecting on this, he must see that as a main component of his argument that consciousness is a biological phenomenon by trying to show that computers don't do what we think they do. Myself personally, I mean, now I'm getting distracted again, but when I think about these things, so I think of the dancing and fading qualia arguments as kind of the main reason people think maybe you should take this seriously, from Chalmers. And I think you can empirically challenge those. So with things like change blindness and intentional inflation, a more recent discovery from the Lau et al. Group. So I'm much more interested in empirical arguments that maybe consciousness is biological. But I guess he sees this as kind of part of the philosophical case maybe for that. But hopefully he's going to move past his discussion about computation and what it can and can't do and start talking about the dualism and physicalism stuff, because I would like to see what there is to that. So let's see. I think this is where we left off last time. I believe I had this up at 1.5 speed. Do we want to keep it at 1.5 speed or do we want to lower it? I don't know. I'm feeling kind of slow today, so maybe we'll lower it. But if I start losing it, we'll speed it back up.
Floridi says, we live in the infosphere.
All right. So what were we? I forget the context of this. Hold on a second. Looks like Hitchcock there.
So much then for the idea that the computer revolt is at hand. What about the fact that everything is information? As Floridi.
Yeah, I don't know. He mentioned this guy last time too. I guess he reviewed both these books. I don't know that review. Someone in the comments said that this talk was given in 2015, so that was fairly recent, actually. What, 7, 8 years ago, and almost 9, maybe, depending on when it was. This Floridi guy, I don't know, but if he's trying to critique something like the simulation hypothesis or something like that, which he already went at Bostrom with half-baked ideas, So let's see what his critique of this is. If it's just that that computations are supposed to be relative, observer relative, then anyway, let's see what he's going to say.
Says, we live in the infosphere.
Okay,
He loves these neologisms, and we're all inforgs. I don't like that one as well. We're all inforgs. We're informational organisms. And the answer to that is the same as the other one. Something is information only relative to an interpretation. So if you say the universe consists of information, it's not really analogous to Copernicus, Darwin, and Freud, his earlier examples, because they all tried to identify an observer-independent phenomenon. The operation of the solar system, in the case of Copernicus, the evolutionary development of a species through natural selection, in the case of Darwin, and even Freud. I mean, whatever you think of it, he thought he had discovered a piece of the geography of the mind. The unconscious wasn't just some observer-relative phenomenon. He had discovered a territory in the mind. It's worth going back to read Freud because it's more extreme than you might think. He says, in itself, beware of Germans who say an sich, by the way. That has a bad history. In itself, a mental state is totally unconscious, and it becomes conscious on analogy with...
Freud. So Searle doesn't like unconscious mental states, right? He's gonna complain about that. But this whole critique is misguided. So let me just hear what he's gonna say, then I'll say why I think it's misguided.
Now, I don't think that works as a theory of consciousness or unconscious, but the point is, Freud thought he was doing a kind of geography of the mind. It wasn't observer relative. Whereas I want to say this discussion of information, the idea that the universe consists of information, that's all observer relative. It's not intrinsic. So there are two basic ideas I want to leave that I'm trying to get across. The first is that the syntax of the computer program isn't sufficient for semantics. What do you need? Well, obviously, you need a conscious mind. You need a conscious agent that's going to give an interpretation to the syntactical entities. And the second point is even the syntax isn't intrinsic to the physics. The first argument showed that the semantics is not intrinsic to the syntax. That's the old Chinese room argument. The second argument shows that the syntax is not intrinsic to physics. So computation in the observer relative sense does not name a fact of physics. So you need to...
Okay, so, yeah. I think that last caveat, actually, I wonder, did he say that on purpose? He said computation of the observer relative sort, suggesting perhaps a non-observer relative or an observer non-relative. Where does the non go? Some kind of intrinsic notion of computation. And in fact, it's interesting, he doesn't even mention the Chalmers kind of style argument, which, by the way, the Chalmers style argument is really, as Chalmers himself says, I don't know if you know the history of this stuff, but there's this paper, though, called, What is a Computation or something like that, that was published kind of recently-ish in the Journal of something, Cognitive Science maybe, or Conscious Studies. Where was it? I don't know. I should look this stuff up before I start flapping off. But it's out there somewhere. And it was a paper that Chalmers wrote a long time ago, and is kind of a well-known view. And he says in this, kind of his response to a bunch of articles there, that if I remember right, that this is not a very original idea with him. What's original with him is sort of using it, making it well-known. But apparently it's not. Because the basic idea is this. Look, you have this computational structure thing, truth tables or an equation or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And you want to say what counts as an implementation of that. And, Searle's argument is it's only relative to us. We define which things, he used to give this in his famous example about how a wall implements every finite state automaton. He was like, well, okay, so take the OR function, we give the truth table for it, and then we just need to find states of the wall that kind of vary in this way. And it's not going to be too hard to even see electrons, kind of going in certain patterns that we could then identify with the, like, it's a 1 in this state and it's a 0 in that state. And that's basically what we do with our computers. We identify certain distributions of electrical activity as either on or off. So Chalmers' response was to say, look, okay, so that may be, I think maybe back then it was more rigid, but his nowadays response is kind of a pluralism. That's one kind of computation. But there's another kind, which is when you have the abstract computational structure and the physical system is built in such a way that the causal structure of the physical system mirrors the abstract structure of the computational mathematical description. Kind of, you think it's all sort of too obvious to even point out in a way. I mean, this is going back, at least where I was most familiar with it from philosophy was going back to, I think I would say this is a Fodorian idea, where this was kind of Fodor's idea about how you get syntax and semantics to line up. You have a bunch of states in the brain that have causal relations to each other, and it just so happens that those causal relations mirror the semantic relations. Like for the Barris Bones example, if you have the sentence A and B, then the truth tables say you can infer A from that, and the causal relations between sentences in the brain that simplify or represent A and B, and sentences of the form A and separately B, mirror this relationship, so that you can see a kind of causal structure and the formal structure, and they map onto each other, and you can give a more formal, rigorous definition of this mapping. And then the way that you can test this by looking at according to Chalmers and the other view, I think, is that you can look at this causal structure of the system and poke at it and prod at it and see if it does in fact mirror the computational structure. So that's not observer relative. The causal structure of the system is as it is. Now, I guess, I don't know, does this really get around all the kinds of questions that you have? For example, could different computational structures map onto the same causal structure? What happens if the physical system breaks down and doesn't, get a chance to compute or see the physical response to these very large sort of things, so Kripkenstein sorts of worries? I don't know. So there's still things that you could say and so forth and so on, but to say that it's all observer relative just because, this very quick argument in the year 2015, after all, okay. So, I mean, I can see this is a critique, but unless you deal with this objection, it doesn't really establish that, the physical world isn't a computation in some sense. This isn't trivial. It doesn't trivialize. Anyway, so I think there's more work to be done here, but it's okay. Let's go ahead. This is a very popular sort of response, but I guess, I don't know how. Do people still take this response seriously as a problem for, like, these kinds of arguments about the brain being a computer or we living in a simulation?
Distinguish the existence of intrinsic computational processes performed by conscious agents from the observer relative processes to which we can attach a computational interpretation. And to repeat, that's not trivial because, of course, we make epistemically objective claims. My computer really is better. And in a way, I have no objection to using the psychological vocabulary. Those guys tried hard to design a program that would beat Kasparov, and they succeeded. It did beat Kasparov. The mistake is to think that that has of some psychological relevance, that in the sense in which you or I played chess, the computer was playing chess. And by the way, if you want a decisive argument for that, do the Chinese room, make it into a chess room. Suppose I don't know how to play chess, but I'm sitting there in a room with a lot of symbols, and symbols come in, I don't know what they mean, but they describe a chess position. I look up in the book what I'm supposed to do, and I give back symbols. They describe a chess move, and at the end, I win the chess game. We'll suppose, because they get so good at programming. All the same, I'm not playing chess. I don't understand anything about chess. But if I don't, neither does any other digital computer, because no computer has anything that I don't have.
Well, see, that's the mistake in the whole argument. If I don't understand it, then the computer doesn't understand it because the computer is just doing what I'm doing. And the mistake, of course, is that's false. He's doing what the CPU is doing, maybe, or some element of the computer. But the computer as a whole is the system. And the system, which includes him as a part, does stand a good chance as counting, knowing how to play chess and understanding the rules. If it can make these moves. Now, I don't know. Do you require that it talk to you about the rules in order to understand them? I don't know. So there's still issues to be discussed, but I don't think that you get to decisively refute these things with the Chinese room or the chess room or whatever kind of room.
Computer is precisely that. It's a device for manipulating symbols. It's a syntactical engine, and the syntax is all observer relative. Okay, now that's kind of the introduction of my lecture on consciousness, but how much time did I leave myself? How much time have I got? Boss? Well, I don't know. All right, I'll look at my watch. I got a watch here. Oh my gosh. Well, but we're going to have a question period, right? I'll talk for a few minutes more. Anyway, okay.
Okay, so a few minutes more. Let's see, looking at this, it's an hour and 10. So that was his introduction. Okay, so we haven't got to the bit on consciousness, I guess. So we'll keep this one a kind of short one. I'll come back for a part 3 if we're finally going to get to consciousness. Keep it all focused since my rant about computation simply may not be interesting to people interested in consciousness. I don't know. I think you should be interested in that stuff. But anyway, whatever.